Hi folks, I'm Alan Watts and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 22nd of July 2018. It's been quite a week up here in Ontario because there's so many forest fires, it's all on the go. And on Friday there were planes going back and forth, the big water bombers as they call them, and helicopters and so on. And the smell in the air of smoke was so thick, it was getting pretty nasty actually to breathe. I mean, on all day, but there's still fighting, of course, all these fires that are going on. And there are many reasons for it, of course, but part of the reason today, I think, as well, is that a few years ago, I remember reading how they were literally privatizing the whole industry at one time of firefighting for forest fires, that is. And as you know, that everything gets privatized eventually becomes incredibly expensive. Whereas electricity or whatever in Ontario, for instance, in Canada, and water, of course, and at the same time too, yet because it becomes so expensive, when big fires break out, for instance, they have to start hiring teams from other outside the province of Ontario, and sometimes outside the country itself. They've got them from, I think, from the US as well, coming in, and they're not big teams; they're small, because it's so lucrative today. The private companies that run them. They have teams of maybe 10 or 11 people in a team. It's not a lot of people. And you hire the team and maybe a water bomber at the same time. And so on. I don't really know too much about it. And like most things today, you can spend your life trying to learn things which that come and go throughout your life so quickly as they change and change and change, along with thousands of other things you relearn, then you just can't keep up with it. So who knows if they'll ever go back. I don't think they'll ever go back to a basically publicly owned system for essential services. That's how it seems to be. At one time, for instance, your police, everything it was put down as an essential service. Your power, especially too, all kinds of power, that was gas and electricity, etc., was also down to a necessary public expense. Today we live in an age of greed, incredible greed, until things are really falling apart. When you bring in shareholders and you keep expanding and bringing in more and more shareholders, then you must get higher returns to pay them all their shares. And you can only do it by expanding your business and charging more all the time, or cutting back on your employees, the one or the other. And the same thing happened in countries that denationalized health services and things like that too. And we still see it even in Canada here. They're always asking for more and more money. And in reality, when you see the incredible amounts of money that they do throw at them, it's because now you have a big bureaucracy, like a civil service almost, of a private civil service running these massive institutions called hospitals today. Very lucrative, of course. And a lot of the professions too are way too overpriced, and it had to happen. It was predicted to happen by a lot of people in the know at the time, way back in the 60s, like Carol Quigley, who actually wrote a little bit about it, about health systems and so on. As more people got into becoming doctors and so on, they weren't content on having the status and having the so-called privilege of serving the public good. They would actually be in it for incredible amounts of money, and he said it would become dysfunctional eventually. I think we're seeing a lot of that today. And there have been many experiments across the world in the areas of medicine, for instance, where you found people, I mean, a lot of people went into these areas, including the nursing staff and doctors, as a vocation at one time. And a lot of doctors, even in the early days, say in Britain and other European countries, used to devote a lot of their free time, free of charge, to charitable-run hospitals. And it's a shame that, in a sense, that spirit's all gone. We live in such, it was true, winners and losers, that's what they preach now in business school. You want to be a winner, and that means a winner to them is how much money do you bring in personally for yourself. That's what a winner is. The second part is how much status do you get from it, but now it's the greed factor. In the old Soviet Union, I think I saw a documentary many years ago where they actually give a lot of tests at school, and the state decided who who could go and become and study medicine for ability purposes, solely for that. And they really were not given more money than, say, a plumber would be. And there were still good doctors, mind you. In the Chinese system, they did different experiments. It's quite interesting to see. For instance, it's a huge country with a massive population. And in the earlier days, I don't know how far back it was, maybe the 80s, maybe or 90s, they had articles in the papers where British doctors and surgeons went over and followed them around, different teams around. They go out into the communities and the villages and towns, and they would have set operations. I mean, general hospitals, for instance, have different surgeries for different days for different ailments, the more routine ailments, for instance. So the Chinese trained them in teams. They didn't give them the full training to be a doctor, by the way, or a surgeon, but they were trained exactly how to perform the operation, and their helpers too, and the anaesthetist was trained for what drugs to give and what to watch out for, etc., etc. And they said they were very successful, and at a very low rate of post-operative shock or stress or infections even. So it was what they were proving is that you didn't have to spend so many years, for instance, to perform simple operations. All they were taught, for instance, you had teams who would just do, say, hip replacements. That's all they would do, as an example. This team, that's all they'd know. And so it's interesting to see what has been done in different areas of medicine. But I think Quigley, for all his own problems, because he was a humanist, he was a believer in the Julian Huxley system, because they all belonged to the same group, by the way. A group that Quigley said they're often mistaken as being communist, as Julian Huxley was. He was also accused of the same things, but they really belonged to the same humanist agenda, which was a clique. More than a clique, in fact. Julian Huxley even said that they'd have to form a pretty well secret society, a club of professionals in academia and so on to make this whole agenda for UNESCO and that come true. So we live in an age, as I say, where a lot of what they talk about doing today, even in medicine, has been tried before, and inevitably they all follow the same route today, because the answer today in a humanistic society is pure basic materialism. How much money do you earn? What can you do with it? What can you show off? And greed runs the show. So hospitals now, with so many specialists earning massive amounts of money, and even your GPs earning lots and lots of money, it just eventually will collapse. Simple as that. The answer to, and eugenics, of course, is to start, which they're already doing, rather than spend money in treating long-term patients, or patients who are terminal, and even not terminal. I've given some stories over the last few weeks on that. But they're giving euthanasia pills. It's very, very cheap, of course. I've even read some stories on openly on the show about people who are younger and who don't have terminal illnesses. They might have various paralysis or whatever, but they could do some home care, basic home care. But rather than give them that, you see, it comes off the same system. They'd rather you take the euthanasia pill, even if you're in your 20s. So money rules the show today, and it will not end well. But what we're talking about here was planned, discussed an awful long time ago by people like Julian Huxley, a big player in all of this. At least he was a definite big front man. I think most of them are all front men to an extent, but big front men. He knew H.G. Wells. They all believed in the early days of a super race, but long before Adolf Hitler came along. They believed in killing off, basically, and sterilizing inferiors, as they called them, in the lower classes. And they managed to even get round World War II, when Hitler basically copied the idea of eradication of different races, because Britain was way ahead of them in the idea department. And it's only really people like Chesterton who really held them at bay. They would have been doing the same thing all over the place in the UK long before. Adolf Hitler basically copied the whole thing under racial hygiene, and here we are today doing the same things he was accused of doing. and yet it's done as a good. Every newspaper presents it as a good thing. It's a good thing. And what you often find in life, the longer you live, if you're awake early on, and you think about things early on for yourself, you don't just parrot things, then you'll see that all the old arguments, which are frowned upon, become lauded as time goes on. At one time, for instance, you'll find that sex with adults, with children, was horrific. And literally, the police would stand away while certain parents might just go and attack some perpetrator. That happened fairly commonly at one time. And yet today, they're changing everything, the next step, and the next step, and the next step. So now they're pushing for the right to have sex with children, as long as they can give consent. And now they discussed that so many times, because it's done to a timetable. Literally a timetable. Every 10 years, they kick it into the next phase. And you live through this. You know what's going to happen, because you've even read the fact that they're doing it to a timetable from their own sites or their own publications a long time ago. And you live through it, as I say. So things that were frowned upon become pushed as okay. But you'll find even long before all that, even when it was frowned upon, the big organizations like the Huxleys and so on were promoting the same idea. Anything which could make sex purely a recreational thing, and I mean almost purely, to depopulate, don't have children. The state would pick up the slack of any problems. They'd deal with it all and pay for it all and so on. And just have lots and lots of sex. So the whole idea is to wean people away from having a partner, because only with a partner would you really want, generally in the old days, to have a child. And then you bring it up as a family, this thing called a family. And the family was the enemy of this organization, which, by the way, was a part of the Milner organization, but they did the part for the left wing, because your main target group must be on your side. So you come out as a champion of the left and the working people. They are your target. Whereas the other side, the Institute for International Affairs, dealt mainly with foreign policies and things like that, and maintaining their own elitist culture in the system. And it's quite fascinating to actually see it all come to pass, everything that they planned come to pass in your own lifetime, and how they've trained everybody and to be in camps. Everybody today is so politicized. It's incredible to watch it. I don't go into town very often, for instance, and when I do, I'm conscious once in a while that if I say something about, say, a product in a store or something like that, and what you're saying is simply because you've looked into different things, even for the products, but they haven't. They look upon you rather curiously as, how do you know that? And why did you want to know that? And what made you want to know that, or whatever? And you can see almost in some areas of conversation, this general chit-chat that you're, as you pass by, basically, almost the readiness for attack. Because the people have become politicized to be hostile, with their political correctness and everything else. And it's almost as though they're all waiting for someone else to say something to pounce on them. Even when you're not saying anything for them to pounce on, it's almost like you get the idea they're ready. It's quite fascinating to watch it. And you can actually tell by the age groups of who's had the most indoctrination with the recent crop up to the age of 20 or whatever. And then you realize too that if you don't watch television, you're not getting the daily programming. They're all getting through fiction, television, and documentaries and so on. They don't realize everything's geared to give them their opinions, because they're presented in such a way with selected viewpoints and situations, with the omission of other sides of the same situations or viewpoints and so on. And so they think they've been taught it all, and anyone outside of those viewpoints is there for an enemy. It's quite interesting to see it. And I've seen it, just holding my tongue, and watching other people chatting stories, and you can see them ready to pounce on each other. It's quite fascinating. It really is. And I'm not surprised by it, because Bertrand Russell talked about they could train the people to believe anything, if they get them young enough. That's always been understood. And with the right indoctrination, Russell said, and Russell, he's a lord, a British lord, with his different books he churned out. Again, a good friend of the Huxleys. Don't forget the Huxleys too. The grandfather, I think, was Thomas Huxley. He became Darwin's bulldog, they called it, the champion for Darwinism after Darwin died. So you find they're all on board with the same agenda, and they'd all appear to be left-wing, including the British lords, these hereditary lords. Until you realised, and you really got to dig into the Royal Institute for International Affairs that dealt with the empire, which they were still building at the time, and very profitable for them all at the top, because for every invasion of a country, to civilise it, as they called it, or to help the poor people by plundering them, they profited mightily from the loot, basically. And the great thing about having an empire is, in a country back home, you can always tax your own people to pay for it, for its policing and for its troops and for railway lines to take all the raw materials out and so on. Anyway, they all worked for one organisation. They owned the right wing, they owned the left wing, and everything in between, because that's how you do it. You don't allow a true opposition anywhere to start up unless you're in charge of it. So Quigley said it. He said, we're often mistaken for communists because a lot of our agenda has a lot in common with communism. And there he was referring to the massive study through science of human behavior and the proper training and education and uniformity, creating uniform society and standardizing. It's been awfully effective. Awfully effective. It's incredible, really. It's a shame, but it's true. Many years ago, I talked about communitarianism, another big part of this plan. They've used lots of terms, of course, and each time people begin to figure out what it really means, people speak out against it, then they change it. But communitarianism is the same sort of thing. You're constantly told, no matter where you go, that you're part of their community and the community is part of you. And they have all these special things on in the community for all the PC things and updated cultural changes and all the rest of it, whoever it happens to be. They'll have a lot of nice things too. Let's all get together and clean up the trash and parks. I think that's not bad. You see, you've got to have things like that to get the folk to start to fall for all. But then when they start, think about it here, think about it. You're in an age of mass communication, mass surveillance like you've never seen before. And you only know a tiny fraction, which is massive at the same time, a tiny fraction of the surveillance on you on a daily basis. Never mind where it's all supposed to go. Well, eventually, I said years ago, eventually you'll have to attend all the communitarian functions as a good citizen. And if you don't eventually do that, you might get away with it once or twice, oh, I'm sick or what, I had a headache, but they only want to know why. Why didn't you come to this function or that function, whatever it happens to be? And because this is what, you have to conform. That's the message today, conformity. It's quite amazing to me, conformity. And I also know too, with all the networking systems, they call it networking, of all the NGO groups, that all come out en masse to protest something together, regardless of whatever it is they're actually supposedly part of at the time. They'll all do that. And that came from the Communist Party at one time, which used to astonish me. I used to wonder why the Communist Party had agents walking back and forth from Canada, having from Moscow University, and having meetings during the Cold War with the communists in Canada, across Canada. And talking about their agendas for networking all types of groups together. If someone's having a protest about whatever it happens to be, then all the different groups, no matter what their particular area of angst is or whatever, would all get together and show a massive support. That's the norm today. That's standard today. I've always said that be careful if you join a group, because you'll never really know what the real agenda is. You might think it's for you. Only the ones that are near the top have an idea what it's all about in reality. And they're heavily funded at the top with their own, some of them even have their own office towers. Massive organizations and foundations. And NGO leaders with massive pension funds and retirements, and they live like kings, some of them. But the followers are generally free. They come for free. And they'll never know what it's all really about. Never ever know. Now we have to remember that in the late 1800s, early 20th century, you'll find these organizations that sprung up with the Darwinian ideas of supreme beings, you might say, and sponsored the whole idea of survival of the fittest. And then Galton came on board with it all and so on. It really took off because what it simply did was put into words for the public under a guise of scientific study, that which the wealthy nobility and elite aristocracy of UK had always thought anyway, and talked amongst themselves. There's nothing new in it really. But you see, here's the difference is putting it under the guise of science. Once something is scientific, or claims to be scientific, it seems to have an authority to it, you see. It's not just an opinion or a prejudice. It's scientific. It's like the idea too of lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics. I think it was one of the Roosevelts said that, and it's quite right. There are lies. You know, what's a lie? You'll say, well, that's your opinion, or you're a liar, or whatever. Damn lies, which comes to a heated argument. And then say, well, here's what I'm going to base what I'm going to say on, and they give you statistics. As though that means that they're going to win the argument. Although today they even teach in universities how to win by fudging statistics. It depends on how you look upon it. It's quite interesting, really. It's almost like the old idea, the old joke of the optimist looking at a bottle of booze, and it's half full. That's the optimist. Whereas the pessimist says, well, it's half empty. It's the same kind of thing. It's all how you can fudge the viewpoint of what the data that you're getting. And you can see 100% said so-and-so when you only have a couple of people actually took part in any experiment. So in other words, there's all kinds of tactics they use to make their points and so on. So science, and adding science, it's a science that's proven. Even though I've read over the years, on the radio, different exposés of follow-ups on many of the big claims that are made, even in medicine. Because every year you say, the scientists have found scientists. And again, it's generally says scientists have found. But they're all living on grants, these people. That's how they make their living. Big grants. On subjects which generally terrify the public, like cancer or whatever. And so they come up with wonderful claims about this particular drug down the road might have, and of course Pharma's happy with that because they can always make big sales for a few years until people find out it doesn't work very well, or there are terrible side effects, or like Vioxx, for instance, that cause strokes and deaths, etc. And it was given out for arthritis at the time. For years, and they keep poo-pooing, it's just, again, the statistics game until they couldn't deny it anymore. This happens quite frequently, but a lot of the studies that they make amazing claims with is just to get another grant for another year and to live well and go off and see beautiful, foreign exotic countries on their travels and as they're doing their studies. So, and then they're actually, again, as other groups look at these studies down the road, they'll find some completely opposite meaning or a different answer altogether. That's the way it's done. That's the way it's done. It happens all the time. Most of them, 90%, they say, just goes on the waste paper basket eventually. These things. Because humans are awfully good at inventing ways of living awfully well. And good news is always better than the truth sometimes. Science is tacked onto it. That's exactly what Julian Huxley did with Eugenics Society. And, it's scientific now. So we can say that the most of those folk you see who are working class and living huddled in those big brick buildings and 20 to a room and dying awfully early, it's not because they didn't have running water or hygiene or toiletry and so on. It's because they're from bad stock. And that was taught as a religion for an awful long time. It still is, actually. It really is still taught as a religion in academia, more so in some professions than others. So it's their own fault, you see, for being poor. If they were of better stock, they wouldn't be in the mess they're in. They'd be living like us, you see. That's what they'd say to each other. People really have a thing about justifying their own status in society. And I have met amazing people who all they'll tell you is about themselves and how they're so great to whatever they do because of their income they bring in and all the rest of it. It's quite fascinating to see it. And you'll see it in medicine as well, even today, because now you see, you can actually say, well, it's scientifically proven that these folk now, they've got bad genes, that's why they've got these illnesses. Now, in society, in the world in general, to even hear the fact that even your illnesses, which are now classed as a burden on society, don't forget this. And it's taught in these little courses when folk are studying medicine today. I mean little courses because when it comes to even diet, for instance, they're taught maybe an hour, and all their studies is on diet, and that's it. Same thing with this. The change has gone on drastically since about the 1970s in their tuition. And that's how you do it. You nudge them a little bit at a time with each class that comes in until you get them pretty well looking in the opposite direction from previous people who passed the same exams long ago.